Kind of wait for all the attendees to sort of come in. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the Netherlands and Louisiana, Partners in Restoration, Protection, and Adaptation. My name is Dale Morris, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Water into the Gulf, which is an applied science and technical resource nonprofit based in Louisiana, which is in fact a product of the Netherlands-Louisiana partnership that we will focus upon today. More on that in a few minutes. The Netherlands boasts some world-class expertise in coastal riverine and urban water management. It was gained over centuries and honed over the really honed over the last 50 years. It is constantly working on its delta, planning for climate change impacts of high and low water, drought and floods, and innovating with policy and science. And since Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Louisiana has been laser focused on its coastal challenges, investing billions of dollars in protection and restoration projects. And Louisiana risks are real and ongoing, with 5 hurricanes making landfall in Louisiana in 2020, 2 of which devastated the state's southwestern parishes. For the Netherlands and Louisiana, coastal protection and adaptation is a matter of life and death. Like the Netherlands, Louisiana is not sitting still. With the nation's fourth largest river system terminating in the Mississippi River Delta and slow-moving tropical storms that overwhelm inland and urban drainage systems, Louisiana's challenges are real and pressing. They demand a proactive science-based response backed up by real dollars and supported by innovation in policy, science, engineering, and planning. I can think of 5 projects right now of that sort in which the Dutch and Louisianans are working together. We hope this webinar stimulates more expert collaboration between the Netherlands and Louisiana governments, academics, researchers, nonprofits, and private sector companies, large and small. Our webinar will look back at the evolution and aspects of the Netherlands-Louisiana relationship. And then we will then look forward to coastal protection, restoration, inland water, and adaptation projects in Louisiana, many of which are inspiring. Before we dig into this partnership, I'd like to ask the Ambassador of the Netherlands to the United States, His Excellency Andre Haspels, to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Dale, and good morning, everybody. And on behalf of the Dutch government, I would like to welcome you to this webinar and thank you very much for joining us. We are meeting, of course, each other in very turbulent times. And all of us, both Americans and those of us in the international community, we can still feel the aftershocks of the events at the Capitol last week. Let me echo here the response of our Prime Minister Rutte and echo that we have faith that the democratic institutions in the United States will prevail. And of course, these events and our meeting today, it comes in the midst of a COVID pandemic, which caused us to have this seminar, this meeting digitally instead of in person. But as a famous Dutch soccer player said, every disadvantage is an advantage as well. So it offers possibilities for us to have people participating at this seminar around the world, speakers, participants from Louisiana, from Washington, from the Netherlands, other areas in the United States. So that's great. Once again, welcome to all of you. It's an important topic today. We want to highlight 15 years of cooperation between Louisiana and the Netherlands on water management, on resilience, but we also want to look ahead, to look forward to our continued cooperation and see what it can bring us. And I'm sure that everyone here remembers the terrible events, it has been referred to already, from the summer of 2005, when Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast and devastated New Orleans. The strongest storm hit the United States in the last 10 years. It was then 90% of New Orleans flooded, more than 1,800 people died. And I think that also the people in the Netherlands were particularly moved by the consequences of Hurricane Katrina, because our country, as you all know, has its own history of battling storms and battling water. We faced a similar disaster in the floods of 1953, and with the same catastrophic effects. We lost 1,800 people in that flood. And with that experience, I think, in mind, the Netherlands Embassy in Washington reached out to the government of Louisiana and see if we could offer support and expertise. And this was the start of a long-lasting cooperation that continues till today. And we really appreciate our partnership with Louisiana. And in our webinar today, as I said already, we will look back at 15 years of cooperation with some people who have been involved at the very beginning of the project and who are still working on the project today. We want to share our successes, our lessons learned, and see where we can further help each other. So we also want to look ahead. What are the challenges for the future? Where might we see other possibilities for cooperation? So this is what I'm very much looking forward to in the next 1.5 hours. Just be assured that the Netherlands government and our water sector, we will remain committed to continuing this fruitful cooperation with Louisiana, with the United States, but with Louisiana, of course, in particular. Thank you for joining us, and let me give the floor now back to Dale. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Before we begin with the presentations, a few words of context and thanks are in order. This partnership is extensive and it's personal for many. Before joining the Water Institute, I served 20+ years at the Dutch Embassy in Washington, the last 13 of which, post-Hurricane Katrina, were spent coordinating the embassy's water and adaptation work. This partnership is a bit like family for me. I visited New Orleans 2 months after Katrina with the then Dutch ambassador to the United States. What we saw overwhelmed us. It saddened us, and yet it motivated us to help. Working for the Dutch, who know a whole lot about water management and aren't afraid to let you know how much they know, that was a solid start. Success has many parents, they say. And the most important parent of this endeavor is Senator Mary Landrieu. Without her drive, energy, toughness, and support, this partnership would never have happened. Thanks are due to Governors Blanco and Jindal and their key staff members, a succession of leaders at Louisiana's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, the Department of Transportation and Development, Louisiana Economic Development, and many coastal parishes, from Plaquemines, Terrebonne, and Lafourche, to St. Bernard and Orleans, and to Cameron and Calcasieu, too. Mayor Mitch Landrieu and many New Orleans City Council members were part of this, and the role of the Louisiana State University and the University of New Orleans was crucial. Nonprofits also helped. Greater New Orleans Incorporated, the Greater New Orleans Foundation, the Fertile Foundation, and the Baton Rouge Area Foundation provided help and support beyond imagination. For the Netherlands, this partnership was nurtured by 6 ambassadors who focused the Dutch government and embassy staff on post-Katrina recovery and on Louisiana. Officials from the Dutch Ministries of Infrastructure and Water, Foreign Affairs, and Economic Affairs encouraged the partnership. Rijkswaterstaat, which is the Dutch peer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, was intimately involved with this, shaping our approach. Officials from Dutch provincial governments in North Holland, South Holland, Province of Zeeland, and key research institutions like Deltares and Delft Technical University, the University of Amsterdam, and Wageningen University research, they all played key roles. And even the office of the Dutch Prime Minister and the then Dutch Crown Prince, presently King Willem-Alexander, were involved. This partnership is thus extensive and deep, and we hope the foundation upon which future collaboration can be constructed. On to the webinar. We ask for your patience. While we're confident in Zoom's webinar and our command over it, Mr. Murphy and his law could be lurking anywhere. We will run seamlessly through the speakers and panelists, beginning with Pete Derka and ending with Justin Aaronworth. Each panelist will share their screen and their thoughts. Links to each speaker's resume has been already posted in the Q&A. Please record questions via the Q&A button. If I can easily answer them, I will. If not, I will pose the questions to the panelists at the end of the presentations. If a pressing question goes unanswered, please email me. My contact information is on the webinar invitation and on the Water Institute's website. Our first panelist is Pete Derka, who we might say was present at the creation of this partnership. Pete, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Tell me if you can see my screen. You can? Okay, yes. There we go. So my story will be a bit of a personal story, observations, and also some personal experiences from me and my colleagues but also from the friends, the clients, and the many people that I worked with in those last 15 years already. It's hard to imagine. It all started, of course, for us in 2005, right after Katrina. Arcadis is, of course, not a Dutch firm only. We are also an American, a US-based firm. We already had a small office in New Orleans that was already working with the Army Corps of Engineers. Let's say after Katrina, we decided to join forces and bring in also our Dutch knowledge. First thing we did is what you see here in this left side picture is it's very interesting, a very spontaneous action, a workshop with the Army Corps and for the Army Corps, simply about knowledge exchange, about flood protection, about dikes, about hydraulics, just to learn from each other and to see where we can help. We brought in, of course, also other colleagues and knowledge partners from other institutes. That was the start in 2005, and 2006 it was already in full swing. I guess some of you may recognize a lot of the faces in the picture here, different delegations that came to New Orleans after Mary Landrieu and her delegation came to the Netherlands. You see here Minister Melanie Schultz from the Netherlands. A lot of other faces you may recognize. Minister Karine van Gennep. I see Mayor Mitch Landrieu hosting us. I see Cedric Grant, of course, in his role with the state at that moment still. Johnny Bradbury, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of exchange, knowledge exchange. And knowledge exchange was taken to a next level by the end of 2007 and in by the end of 2006 and into 2007, when the Army Corps in New Orleans district, together with the Dutch partner of the Army Corps, the Rijkswaterstaat, so the Dutch version of the Army Corps, organized a number of workshops, knowledge exchange again as the basis. What can we learn from the Dutch, but also the Dutch, what can they learn from us? How can we tackle the challenges that we face in New Orleans? And what types of technologies or knowledge would be useful to bring in from the Dutch? You see again, I guess here many familiar faces. And this was not only knowledge sharing, of course, this was also about building relationships and getting used to each other and learn from each other. And one of those learning experiences in 2007, it was quite an exciting one, was called the Dutch Perspectives. The Dutch were challenged by the Army Corps to develop a kind of a Dutch vision on the coastal protection restoration plan that was under development at that moment. And we did that jointly with the Dutch partners under the umbrella of the Netherlands Water Partnership. Also an important party to mention, I think, in that whole development of our relationships and friendships. And you see here a little bit what that plan looked like, roughly, and you see in the bottom left picture, people like Ihnc and Carl Anderson here listening to the Dutch team, the broad team with not only Arcadis and Deltares, but also Royal Haskoning, THV, several other parties, Fugro, Delft, a lot of parties involved. And at the same time, it was a very happy and a very proud year for Arcadis because January 4th, 2007, we learned that we had one very large IDIQ contract, so a frame contract with the Army Corps for consultancy services in a large joint venture, a large US consortium led by Arcadis, but with also several Dutch parties on board. And we were in the fantastic opportunity to present our plan at the Amsterdam Water Week. It was called the Aquatech at that time. To our prince at that time, Willem-Alexander. You see him here in the picture with the blonde hair. Our king currently. He's a real expert in water management. You would be surprised. He really knows what he's talking about. It's pretty unusual for a king to be a water manager. I guess that's only possible in the Netherlands. You see him talking here to some of our partners at Ihnc, Carl Anderson. And in the top right picture, you also see, but that's a secret, of course, at last minute, he gave us also some instructions to make some changes in the flood protection plan for New Orleans. And of course, we honored that vision from him. So work for the Army Corps. Arcadis is really proud and feel privileged that we got the opportunity to support the Army Corps in developing this plan. This was not done by Arcadis, not done by the Dutch or by any other firm or contractor. We all supported and we all helped the Army Corps, who was of course responsible for developing this giant plan. You see it envisaged here. It's basically a very simple plan, armoring New Orleans with a wall of steel and concrete around it. And that has the advantage that it keeps the water out, but it also may have several disadvantages, I guess David will speak about later. But for the moment, this was the best that the Corps could do because New Orleans was unprotected after Hurricane Katrina. There was absolutely no protection. I'm not going into detail of what we exactly did there, just show you two examples, two of the most well-known examples. This is the Western Closure Complex. You see the iconic sky view in the background of New Orleans. You see the Superdome there. And you see in the foreground, you see a combination of a storm surge barrier, a sector gate to the left, and a gigantic pump station, the largest pump station on Earth, for this very specific challenge of New Orleans, where during a hurricane, on one hand, there could be a storm surge trying to enter the city, while at the same time, enormous masses of rainwater have to be pulled out and have to be drained. So if you close everything, all your doors, there's no water going out. So that's why this giant pump station was constructed here, surrounded by flood walls and all other kinds of structures that you see here. We talk here about an order of magnitude $1 billion and even a bit more. And the other structure I wanted to show you here is in the Lake Borneo, Ihnc in a Harbour Navigational Canal, storm surge barrier. Again, a $1 billion structure, gigantic. It's like 2 miles long. It has several gates types in it for shipping, for both commercial as well as shipping, for fishery purposes and for recreation. Pretty challenging environment, as this wall had to be built in the middle of a swamp. Very new technologies were used here for the construction. It was a giant challenge, but it was all mastered, it's all done, it's all completed. And in 2011, Arcadis organized a press tour. We invited Dutch journalists to come to New Orleans and to visit. And these are some images from that press tour, and it is really almost unimaginable. I don't think you realize, if you don't really take your time to think about it, this is 2011. This is just 4 years after the contracts were signed. And New Orleans was almost ready. The works were not completed, but they were already hurricane-proof. I call it here warp speed. I can tell you, it took the Dutch a lot longer to finish their Delta plan. It took us maybe 40 or 50 years. The Army Corps and the Americans did it 10 times faster, and it's still an achievement that is hard to imagine. It also means that a lot of things were set aside for the moment, but it means they really did a great job, and time really gave the Corps, let's say, all the credits it can give, because what not many of us know is that not so long after completion of the constructions, New Orleans was hit by a hurricane. Most people, everybody knows Hurricane Katrina, but who can still remember Hurricane Ihnc? Hurricane Ihnc hit New Orleans right after the completion of most of the work. And you see here the headlines in the New Orleans newspapers. The defenses held. The defenses held. New Orleans was not flooded. In fact, with that hurricane and several hurricanes after that, you would see that people would come to New Orleans in case of a hurricane instead of evacuating or going away. And just some images, you see some familiar faces here, giving you a bit of an impression. New Orleans recovered, and it recovered very well. And in my storytelling, I always emphasize also the success, not only of the Army Corps and the flood protection, but also of the Dutch dialogues and the many other achievements. But there is a story to tell about the success, and not only about the failure of New Orleans, which is the story that most people remember best. And just some other highlights. I know my time is flying away. Rotterdam Connection. New Orleans also became a city that looked for other cities with comparable issues. It joined the Connecting Delta Cities initiative. It became very active in the C40. It became active as a 100 Resilient Cities city, pioneered by Rockefeller Foundation. And you see many of those people. You see Gazan Corban here, you see Cedric again, you see Jeff Hebert, many other familiar faces. We see, of course, Mary Landrew that came to the Netherlands first. So there was also kind of a reach out to Rotterdam as a kind of a buddy city, a partner city, but also connecting to many other cities, which is also one of the outcomes. And one of the most funny, strangest outcomes, I would say, are told by these pictures. This is, just imagine what this is. This is an Indonesian delegation from Jakarta that was brought to New Orleans, but also to New York, by the Dutch, who are working in Jakarta on a flood protection system, which is badly needed. You see me standing on a very tiny wobbly wall in a city that is subsiding below sea level. And they came to learn from New Orleans and from New York and bring that to their country. And you see we're connecting here 3 cities already now, and also Jakarta became a well-known partner here in this in this whole exchange of knowledge. So this was a very exciting trip. Many of us were involved. You see also Dale in the background smiling there, and you see other colleagues from Royal Haskoning and Arcadis, and you see the Indonesians easily to recognize in their fabulous batik shirts, painted shirts. I'm not going to explain the technology. They had a great visit, and we made friends. And this is just another image to show you my personal experience, how we all made friends over the years, visiting each other, having dinners together. You see me here with Rudy Gishard, our leader in Baton Rouge and in New Orleans for Arcadis, at the crawfish broil that I also had to learn to peel them with Army Corps colleagues. You see even David Wagner and me in Venice, of all places, where we also ended up in a visit. You see David visiting me in Maastricht, in my hometown, and then not only visiting and enjoying the city, but also talking to local architects, meeting with water management governments in the Netherlands. So always making that combination of knowledge exchange, learning, but helping, but also about the friendship. Just some other side effects that we had, of course, as Arcadis, we grew our business. We were almost like a sleeping giant in water management that woke up, that could build the business in New Orleans, some Dutch colleagues and a lot of Americans. And we could extend that business also to other places in the US that also are in desperate need of more and better water management and coastal resilience. You see René Dolfsma in New Orleans. He lived there for almost 5 years. Our New York city hero, Edgar Westerhoff, in the middle, talking to the press. And Peter Wijsman, who started his career with the Netherlands Water Partnership, as many of you know, and as my wing pilot, is already for a long time now our local executive in San Francisco. You see that in the top right picture in California. For those of you who don't know Peter, it's the guy to the left. And just 2 more examples of how that business development worked out. We had, of course, New Orleans work still ongoing when New York was already hit by Hurricane Sandy. And just one iconic picture that you all know from the Big U consortium that we participated in. The Rebuild by Design efforts by Henk Oving, Sean Donovan and others. A lot that we learned in New York, we also used in that we learned in New Orleans, we also used in New York. I'm absolutely sure that a lot of the ideas, particularly from the Dutch dialogues about integrated approaches, multidisciplinary approaches, community involvement were the elements that were also introduced in New York where after Hurricane Sandy. And this is just one example of the largest project, most challenging project we are working on right now in New York. And that's on the lower Manhattan side, the financial district, so the Wall Street vicinity and seaport, where we are now working on a new integrated coastal development plan that also has to tackle a number of very substantial urban challenges here. And finally, Peter Weisman in San Francisco. Also here, a lot of the knowledge developed in New Orleans and also the business we could bring and develop in San Francisco. There were many Dutch also traveling to San Francisco, working on both coastal resiliency as well as on a very special project called the San Francisco Seawall. And here we really learn new stuff because this is not only about coastal resilience and climate resilience, but this is also about earthquake resilience. So that's almost the next level, I would say. I guess my time is up, Dale, so I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. I think I just want to underline one of the things that Pete said. I'm getting an echo. Pete, maybe turn your mic off.
Yeah.
Before I turn it to Brecke, one of the things that I think that's important is, so there's a number of partnerships and friendships that grew out of this relationship, but they led to collaboration, they led to innovation, they led to partnerships. And what Pete mentioned, you know, Arcadis and some of the Dutch folks who had worked in New Orleans post-Katrina took some folks from New Orleans with them to New York and to California when they worked. So this sort of microcosm or ecosystem of partnerships and collaboration and innovation and doing good work to mitigate flood risk, it continues today. So it's a nice partnership, and we think it's one of the great spin-offs. So our next speaker is Brecke van Wezenbeek. Brecke is a friend. She's also a brilliant scientist at Deltaris, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Deltaris partnership and then some of the work that she's doing that's relevant to Louisiana. So Brecke, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dale. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I would have preferred, of course, to be in Louisiana, but it's not like that. Yeah, it's like Pete did, I have to say. I started browsing my archives and looking at old pictures. So it was a bit a trip down memory lane. And I think I sort of started to fall in love with Louisiana at some of my airboat trips. Beware of your ears. Usually you have the protective headphones on. So a little bit of a Louisiana taste for me. And I think, well, we used to do this a lot, right? Go out in the wetlands when I started working there. That was a little bit later than Pete, because when Katrina hit, I was still doing my PhD at Brown University. I remember my professor there, taking two students from the University of New Orleans in his house, because people needed accommodation throughout the country, right? But, oh, no, I don't want to do this again. I'm going to go to the next. And I think it was also after Katrina, and in the same year as Katrina hit in 2005, the Millennium Ecosystem came out. And the Millennium Ecosystem assessment, it launched this concept of ecosystem services. So I think what happened is that people started appreciating wetlands also in coastal Louisiana as something else than only hunting and fishing grounds, right? And for recreation. And people started understanding that these wetlands actually protect their livelihoods and their cities, and that they're vital for the existence and sustainability of coastal Louisiana and for a city like New Orleans. I found this picture incredibly impressive. It's near Lake Leary, where now the Canaveral diversion is. And you see, it's from USGS, and you see on the left the wetlands before Hurricane Katrina in that area. And on the right, satellite image of after Katrina. You see all this wetland area there disappeared. I think this was largely floating marsh, and a lot of these floating marsh, they completely rolled up and disappeared. But still, they dissipated a lot of the hurricane and the surge energy by doing that. And I think I came to Louisiana first in 2008 when Piet introduced the Dutch perspective. But when, as part of the Dutch perspective, we started to develop this pilot. And the Dutch perspective highlighted 3 strategies. One was like completely hard, having a coastal defense levy, and it highlighted the cost of it. There was like a middle strategy, but the current strategy actually reflects most this strategy that you see on the left, which was a soft strategy. It's based on a soft shell around New Orleans and then the inner dike system. And we proposed this pilot there to restore floating and peat-based marsh, which we called it the marshland polder, but then finally we called it subsidence reversal. And I heard Piet already say failures and successes. And basically this was not based on a big success story. It was actually based on a mistake or a failure from the Netherlands. It was based on this is the Flevopolder, which is actually the last polder that the Dutch drained in 1968. And you see in the middle of all this agriculture land, you see on the top, you see that area, that is a marsh area, but it's endiked. So within the polder, we had a marsh area because we actually were developing all this land and then we forgot to develop this little piece. And nature, actually a marsh developed there rapidly and by itself. So this is what the Flevopolder looks like, all agricultural, highly productive land. And then this is that area on the top. And by the time we were ready to develop that area, it had a sort of protective status. So people start complaining, say, this is such a beautiful natural area. So we had done this immense, expensive polder project, and then we had this high marsh. And what happened is because the polder areas, the agriculture areas, they start compacting because of drainage and clay compaction. And now this area, right now, it's several meters higher than the surrounding agriculture polders. So we basically, now it's an enclosed water unit, otherwise it would leak to the surrounding agricultural land. Well, as we're the Netherlands, I think that was not the aim to actually increase areas, but we took it as an example to do this subsidence reversal pilot in the Netherlands, where we had this place in Jean Lafitte National Park, and we wanted to actually make an enclosed water unit and then start peat building by first draining it and then slowly increasing the water level. This pilot never happened though. And I think it's not so important because you have enough small pilot projects. And I think it was 2007 that the CPRA got installed because, of course, if you want to do something that Louisiana is doing that is innovative, that is like using your natural system and managing your natural system in a sustainable way as a protective belt for urban areas and for infrastructure assets, you need a common vision. So you need to move away from separate projects and you need to link all these projects together. And that's also why I think that besides a CPRA and a managing and execution authority, you also need a science institute such as Deltares is. And now you have the Water Institute in Louisiana to consolidate this knowledge and to also select what are good methods to monitor, to reflect on it, and to consolidate and share and make this knowledge available so that you learn while doing this, right? Well, at least there is a joint vision now that you're working together, so you can stitch all these small projects together. But this is also what we value as Deltares and why a knowledge institute is important. A knowledge institute can be independent and critical. So you need small projects and you can stitch them together, but you also need scalable projects. And some projects are not going to save the coast of Louisiana. So there were like tons of requests for these very small scale patented copyrighted projects that, well, like this, the question is, can we really scale that up? So although in some areas they may help, soon the realization start dawning on people that we needed something bigger, right, than this way of restoring, because it would be expensive, too slow. And that is when people start looking into the importance of the river. And this is a picture that I like a lot, but that lot, I think most of you will know. It's the different delta lobes that the Mississippi has been making throughout time. And we used it in the changing course competition. The title already says it, but it was a Louisiana-based competition, basically focusing on, okay, how do we change course in the way that we work with the river? Because of course, for managing the marshland and the wetlands, the river is the essential, it's a lifeline for all marshlands, and the sediment it contains are desperately needed to counteract sea level rise and subsidence in the marshlands. Well, we were also inspired a little bit by the Dutch Room for the River, of course, because the Dutch also start giving more space to their rivers. And now we are actually rediscussing this again, or of sort of doing this changing polder schemes in the Netherlands, where we actually bring back sediment and sediment from the sea and the river back to polders. And this is actually where, well, I think Louisiana is still an example. I think I cannot think of projects in the world. The sand engine and the Dutch sandy coast are a good example of really large scale nature-based flood defenses, of where we use the natural system to protect us against flooding from sea. But Louisiana is also doing this now at such a scale. This is I think it's the Davis Pond diversion. That these diversions and bringing back the system, the river in the system, is of course a combination. We call it engineering with nature or building with nature, but the basis of it is really thorough engineering, right? It's calculating how much water can we get out of it, how do we get the sediment to move with the water, do we get only the mud fraction, or can we also get the coarser sediments and the sands back into the marsh system? Well, and then still balancing between all the different river functions, right? Also navigation, other functions. So the basis of building with nature and engineering with nature, of course, is understanding your natural system. And this is just a whole example of these different natural system elements. And that also makes it challenging, right? Because you have to bring all these different disciplines together. So it's really cross-disciplinary. We're talking about the geological system, groundwater, and soil composition. This is one of the projects we did in New Orleans on land subsidence, and basically taking samples, combining with modeling, and then making this land subsidence map for New Orleans. Hydrology is another system component you need to assess. The top in the middle, that's a project we're doing for Lake Charles in Calcasieu Parish. We're doing a hydrological assessment of 6 watersheds, combining it with finally with intervention strategies. On the right is something where it all comes together. It's a basin-wide or TO27 model of the Water Institute, which actually is morphological change of the bird food delta, right? But this model actually stitches it all together. It includes hydrology, it includes morphology, it includes ecology. And the lower one is ecology. So this is where we used Earth observation techniques together with all these projects are done with many local partners and universities, engineering firms, and the Water Institute, of course. And this is here where we map all vegetation types along the Louisiana coast by using Earth observation and then ground referencing vegetation types. So these are the different system components that you all need to consider when doing this natural or building with nature or engineering with nature. And then the challenge, of course, is to translate this to intervention. And here also, this work is cross-disciplinary. So you cannot do it by yourself. You cannot do it only as an engineer, because your intervention portfolio exists of natural interventions, of structural interventions, and of non-structural interventions, of interventions in the built environment by lifting houses. Flood insurance is completely to the right. So by intervention in the institutional or financial system, but also of interventions in your natural system. And then this is also some work for the Lake Charles area, where we actually start evaluating these interventions in strategies or portfolios of interventions for different scenarios. So those are flood risk, climate change scenarios, and socioeconomic scenarios. So thinking about a longer term perspective, which you need to do, of course, when you're dealing on large scales, you also need to consider for longer terms. Are we not moving ourselves with this strategy in a sort of lock-in situation, which we are also doing in the Netherlands, and which is a very urgent question for us now? What direction should we move when we would, for example, experience extreme sea level rise? Well, then, crucial for this work and crucial for Knowledge Institute, combining methods. Here you see Roelof, who also does a lot of work in Louisiana with people around here, but basically combining monitoring in the field with what I showed, like Earth observation data, with modeling, and with data analysis, and doing this in bigger partnerships. So collaborate, have local people in, maybe even ask communities and involve local stakeholders, and share knowledge. That's, I think, for this field, that's extremely important. It's an innovative field and things are new. And I think even if you start to do it by yourself, you won't be as fast and make as much steps and advance the fields than doing it together. And we can even share this globally, which we are doing. This is one of the approaches that we've been applying in several countries now. It's the top left is the Christmas tree cribs you're using in Louisiana. On the right, we have it, top right, we have it in the Netherlands, we call it salt marsh works in the north of the Netherlands to recreate salt marshes. But down left, that's Suriname, where they use it to restore mangroves. And down right, that's Indonesia, where they use it also to restore mangroves in projects. So this is basically what I do when I'm working across the world. I'm sharing with people the case of Louisiana, and they always find it. So when we do trainings and courses, when we do capacity building, I tell them about the Mississippi Delta, because there's many other countries with similar deltas that also erode and with similar problems. And they find it extremely inspiring to hear what is happening in Louisiana, and to hear that people in the US also struggle with this, and that this is innovative, and that you can learn from each other in doing this. So still not finished this work, and I think we keep getting knowledge from inside the US to outside the US, and bringing knowledge from outside to the US inside the US, and that way we will collaboratively learn about engineering or building with nature.
Thank you, Brecke. That was terrific. I think one of the things that we're most proud of in this relationship is what Brecke stressed is we're improving science, we're improving planning, we're improving multidisciplinary collaboration, and it's having impacts in the Netherlands, it's having impacts in Louisiana, it's being exported to other places in the US and other places around the world, and we're doing it together. And I think this is a fantastic byproduct of something that started off of Hurricane Katrina. So thank you, Brecke, wonderful. The next speaker is David Wagner. David Wagner is the co-forefather, inventor of Dutch Dialogues, along with myself. And we stumbled upon this, and it has grown in impact and importance for a lot of places. And so I asked David to give us a flavor of what that is and how that's been working. David?
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, everyone. Ambassador, it's good to meet you this way. We've made many friends over this period of time, as Pete and Brecke acknowledge. The work we did has had repercussions. This is a chart that's now 2 years old, but you can see from the beginning with Dutch Dialogues how much has grown from this, and we don't have to understand the particulars of it, but this is a rock in the water that the circles are expanding from which the circles are expanding. Starting here in New Orleans, and starting with motivations that are still unsatisfied. Once the Army built the the wall at the perimeter, these residual components of a flood risk reduction system became motivation for me to take away. Pete pointed out they weren't necessary anymore. Still work to be done. It's a long course, this going forward, but the event that caused it was chaotic and catastrophic. We talk about shocks and stresses, and this is the shock that came upon the city and flooded the city, and the map of the city then of everything that had been developed since about the 1880s went underwater. You can see that. I then, found myself over a period of time in the Netherlands looking for a way. Sometimes it was lonely, pilgrim, and here I am in North Holland wondering, what am I doing? But I found myself also in Rotterdam, and being an architect, I felt more comfortable, of course. And I understand this complex of water management and investment that the Dutch are so good at doing. And we found this water plan, version 2 that Rotterdam had, and the authors of this. And as was said already, Rotterdam became central to this effort. The comparisons between the Netherlands and Louisiana are not abstract. They're actual, they're physical, they're morphological, between the Riesdale painting and this one by Muck, a Louisiana painter. You can see the similarities in this landscape, but you can also see the lack of attention to detail between a Louisiana canal and a Dutch canal. And then we had this ditch, or a Dutch phrase, and we've not really fixed the ditch yet. But still, there's a lot of design and detail that allows this to be beautiful and to improve the quality of life. As we started this process and we're trying to figure a way forward, and this was done with the only government support we had was the Dutch government. It was basically a solo effort. We were trying to stir up people, and we're going to do Dutch dialogues. One, and we don't really have a place, but we had designed this building years before for the Port of New Orleans. So this was our host. It was also the place we closed the urban water plan presentations. Dutch Dialogues 1 occurred. This is, at Dutch Dialogues 1, Pete made this comparison. You can look at that yourself and see the differences between rules and regulations, especially Arnold Molinar was there, Han Meyer was there. We began to develop the network of people and understand this was not really a design-oriented workshop. The second was a design-oriented workshop in Dutch Dialogues 2. And it really looked at this all scales approach, the regional scale, the district scale, and then the area scale. Bosch Slobbers came on board, and Steven Slobbers made this drawing, and you can probably see alligators in the marsh and all that, but trying to use water to create identity. The extemporaneous aspect of this is somewhat thrilling. The risk is also sobering of not performing. This is the Gentili plan that Robert de Koning, I think, drew. And it's a district plan that you will see going forward continues to be reinforced and actually constructed. The basic principle was add water, circulate water, and create identity through water. No diagram more clearly expresses the approach than this, perhaps. But then coming down in scaling, looking for places where you've got urban wasteland and you have opportunities to add water to reduce flooding and also create quality of life and identity and economic opportunity. In all this, our friend Rudolf Stuurman, who Breccia referred to, one of these unseen things, right? What's going on with the groundwater? What's going on here? The depth of the Mississippi River in New Orleans is over 60 meters. The lake is very shallow. What's happening with the fresh and the brackish groundwater? And this is something that in New Orleans, nobody until this effort was really paying enough attention to. The process was good. We worked together. It was really a faculty effort. We say that this was an international and interdisciplinary, but it was also intergenerational exercise, because there were younger people and older people, but many of the people who were participating are university professor levels or high-level professionals. There was some knowledge sharing, there was some publishing. Pete referred to the Delta cities. Out of Dutch Dialogues 1, the phrase Delta urbanism was strongly understood in a series of books that Han Meyer shepherded, and then the Dutch Dialogues book out of phase 2 that Dale and I participated in doing. There's been much press for this effort. The American Planning Association was really our third partner in this effort, Paul Farmer. And, they covered this very well, but so did Architectural Record and other things, and so did the Atlantic and magazine and so forth. We involve leadership. Dale already referenced Mary Landrieu, our general there, directing it next to Ton Scott. And then there's Mitch Landrieu and another ambassador, Renee Bose-Jones, and Dale and Connie Willems, as we're trying to get them to understand the priority that water needed to have in New Orleans everywhere. We collaborated, and again, you see the different range of people, and you see some people had gray hair and some people had less hair, but there were younger people also in this mix, and we presented to one another and we critiqued one another and we improved the work. So by Dutch Dialogues 3, we had a robust idea of what to do with water. It was no longer just add it, but it was like, where can we add it? What will we do with the pumps? What do we do to convert this infrastructure? It was never a greenfield condition. It was a restoration, renovation project, and then circulating water system. And then if we look at the assets we have, how do we redeploy those? And then it all scales. So understanding that this was a vascular system where water is the blood of the land, as I used to say and have said again, we pushed this forward. This became an academic exercise. University of Toronto, all across North America really, and WashU in St. Louis continued this program for several years, all influenced really by the Netherlands. Jane Wolfe had lived in the Netherlands and she understood the things and the priority. This eventually led to some funding, and the Greater New Orleans Water Plan then came. Resilient New Orleans came directly from that, which was the city's effort. Both of these won American Planning Association top awards. We identified these three problems of flooding, this wicked subsidence, and this wasted water assets, and changed the paradigm so that storage became important and pumping became something that wasn't the first recourse, first idea, although it's a difficult addiction to break. Proposing then this living water system, proposing then that we would have a blue-green city, that we could manage water in some harmony with nature. In being responsible, we have a benefit cost ratio that's 3 or 4 to 1. And I remember presenting very well at the BIM house one day, this program, and a Dutchman coming up afterward and said, well, okay, you have a good cost benefit ratio. How is it getting done now? And, I had to more or less explain that America is not so rational nor so wise about investments, and we're still struggling to cobble this together. There is no way to overestimate the relationships, the guangxi, in the Chinese way. This is the people together at the end of the water plant presentation back at the port. You can see Ihnc in the back there, who's joining our group and then carrying this forward. The Gentilly Resilience District was actually the NDRC's application for New Orleans, and you see the Dutch dialogue concept on the left and the water plan in the middle, and then you see that it became the city's awarded program for NDRC application, which then is now actually being designed and implemented to actually add water to the city. This is the Mirabeau Water Garden, where we're doing a 25-acre experiment with saturating the land to keep the flooding out of the neighborhood and create a place. This program, driven by, inspired by the Dutch, Wagner and Ball had 4 clients, and we won about $400 million for those 4 clients here of the $1 billion that was there totally. One of the wins, and maybe the Dutch had less to do directly with this, was the Louisiana SAFE program, which is a corollary adaptation program correlated to the coastal master plan. The old map of Louisiana was this. The current map of Louisiana, or not current, even a few years ago, as Breccia foreshadowed is this diaphanous delta floating, just disappearing. And then with no action, it goes to this. The coastal master plan gets back some of that if you actually get the diversions in place. But no matter the case, the habitation here has to adapt. So the state has a program accepted by the governor that we authored with CPEX, who's also been influenced by the Netherlands greatly, about low risk to high risk zones, looking to put the infrastructural investments in the low risk zones, looking to move the development patterns toward places that are safer over time. This Louisiana Safe program, especially the regional document, I would ask you to look at. There were 6 parishes we've provided documents for. It was a series of looking at the areas, the different parishes, and what their long-term vision might be, and then to identify some projects that actually get funded and are beginning construction. Actually, through many of them are through design now. A series of $6 million innovative projects to show people a different way to work with water. The largest and the largest part of the award for the state of Louisiana was the Ile de Jean Charles resettlement, with which we've also been involved. This is the island in Terrebonne Parish that's melting into the sea. A native population, and the relocation is within the parish, but to the further extent of the parish, upland. What we've done there is create the master plan and for it, as well as the infrastructure. 40 houses are being built. The market sheds are being built. The community center is being built, or they're actually out to bid right now, but the infrastructure is under construction. We try here, though, to borrow upon native ways. The cultural antecedent is of prime importance. This is a community that in North America has been disrespected as much as any. And so how can we bring them back together on this new site? This moves to rebuild by design, this way of thinking in coastal Connecticut. If you look at this picture, I remember the consul general saying that, the most interesting about this drawing was Long Island Sound, which is in fact true, but a Dutch perspective, look at the water first. We worked in Bridgeport. We are still working in Bridgeport, looking at this multiple layers approach and how we use green at the edge to protect, but also in the Northeast Corridor, trying to understand where you have to thread infrastructure to protect the Northeast Corridor, the train system that goes through there. And we continue to work there, without my saying more about Bridgeport, with both the Rebuild by Design Award and the National Disaster Resilience Competition Award, with some very interesting and hopefully innovative design projects. This Dutch dialogues process also we did in Norfolk, Tidewater, Virginia, Hampton Roads, Virginia. That tells me I'm running short on time. We worked for Hampton, looking at that. We also looked at Norfolk, and this is again work that continues even now, including this project here at Ohio Creek that's under construction at present. You can see in this that this is in fact being built. This is working with Arcadis in design and construction. Hampton, in fact, is continuing this work as well, and they're finding innovative ways to finance it, which is a key in America, that you can figure a way to pay for it. We work with Deltaris, Arcadis, Bentham Crowell in Chennai. It's a water's leverage program that Ihnc led. Very different context. The conditions of cleaning up a canal, they call it a drain. How do you make that better real estate? How do you respect the people who live here, who have these ways of making a living, these ways of living? And how do we then look at the landscape and take the geomorphology into consideration and try to understand the best ways to help these people redevelop? We were also, of course, working with Indian partners. We took this effort to Houston. Again, we looked at several scales. We really didn't have the ability to look at a regional scale here, and having learned to be Dutch, I think we have to always understand the regional aspect. But we did, and again, you see the extemporaneous drawing, look at how we would redevelop the Independence Height area or the Greens Point area, and this is actually a design contract out now. I think for the interior, Charleston, where we've been most recently, a very beautiful part of the United States, 350-year-old city, working with this methodology of ground up, learned from the Dutch, applied by us resolutely now. Working here with Ihnc and Peter Shingenga, another great collaborator we've had over the years. I'm not naming all our friends. I apologize, but this is looking at a polder. How do you make Charleston a water-safe place? And then with Robert de Koning again, working here at Church Creek, which is an old swamp, and how do you reconnect the hydrology in this place back on the peninsula, and looking at how this becomes more prosperous, more beautiful, and safer. We're working currently with Arcadis and Moffett Nickel and Water Institute with Dale at how to inform Charleston to get something more from the Corps of Engineers with a 3x3 study. So where do we go with this? And the ambassador said this in the beginning, and I close with, there are many places on earth that have issues. This is another crescent city. New Orleans is known as a crescent city because of the river. This is known as Crescent City because of the bay. This is the northernmost city in California. It was wiped out in '64. It was wiped out in 2011. Since then, this jetty's been built. Most tsunami-prone place in North America. Constructed after 1964, reconstructed by the Corps of Engineers. Not in the ideal way. We have to learn the lessons that we've got there in the past. And then we take it where? We were right before the pandemic looking to work in Japan. And there are many things we can learn from others. I appreciate all the things we've learned from the Dutch. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, David. Very inspirational. It's an honor to be part of this work and whatever, to push all this forward. So that's sort of a highlight, very high level abstraction of all the various things that come out of the partnership that started in Louisiana right after Katrina. Again, some very personal and some very inspirational, and we hope to continue this along with all of our friends. One of the things that we think a lot of the folks do not understand is how innovative Louisiana has been post-Katrina. And we have Bren Haas, who's the executive director of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, to talk about the coastal master plans and how they've evolved over the last number of years and how they continue to evolve and how Louisiana is really responding to this crisis. After Bren, we will have Justin Aaronworth, the president of the Water Institute, to talk about some other projects in Louisiana that are innovative, inspirational, and may inspire further collaboration. Right now, I'll ask Bren to take it away.
Well, thank you, Dale. I appreciate that. There we go. Thought I was having some slide troubles there, but no, I very much appreciate it. Again, my name is Brent Hawes. I'm the executive director of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority in Louisiana. We're the entity, as was mentioned earlier, the state entity that's really responsible for putting into action a lot of the lessons learned and some of the big picture things that have been discussed earlier, and some of the things that we've learned through this valuable partnership, obviously, with the Netherlands. So we're responsible for implementing projects that help to restore our coastal ecosystem and also protect our coastal communities, our coastal citizens from hurricane storm surges. So I'll just talk a little bit about kind of the timeline of our organization. Obviously, the year 2005 has already been mentioned. That was a very significant year in the history of the Gulf Coast, certainly the coast of Louisiana. Obviously, 2005 was the year that Hurricanes Katrina and Rita hit our coast. Tremendous devastation, both in the greater New Orleans area and in the southwestern portion of our state. Much of that's been mentioned already, but billions of dollars and hundreds of billions of dollars in damages and response occurred as a result just of Hurricane Katrina alone. Thousands of deaths, unfortunately, occurred in the greater New Orleans area and the southwestern portion of the state as well. And in the period of just a couple of days with those two events, we lost hundreds of square miles of our coastal ecosystems. So that was really the moment in time, I think, when Louisiana woke up a bit in terms of how we had conducted our business along our coast related to both ecosystem restoration, restoring our coastal wetlands, and protecting our coast. really prior to, or protecting our coastal citizens, I should say, from storm surges. Prior to that hurricane season, we had essentially two entities within the state. One was looking at our coast from a perspective of protecting our citizens from storm surges, and the other was looking at the coast from the perspective of restoring our ecosystem. Really without the realization that the two really rely on each other. Of course, our coast, our natural coastal system is a first line of defense as a storm is approaching our coast in terms of buffering the effects of those storms on our structural protection systems and our communities. And that really wasn't, I think, understood very well or thought about very well prior to hurricane season of 2005. And so that was kind of our wake-up call. Later that year, it was contemplated to form the organization again that I work for, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. And we have been charged with integrating those two facets of our coast ever since. We are directed to develop a master plan for our coast. So this is a long-term, large-scale planning effort that we have historically been required to prepare every 5 years. The first one of those plans was developed in 2007. And again, really the intent of that plan is to integrate coastal restoration, coastal protection into one vision for our coast that we can all get behind and advocate for. The first of those plans was developed in 2007. It really was an aspirational look at our coast. What would we do if we could do everything that we would want to do for our coast to restore those ecosystems and protect our citizens from storm surges? So it was a very good foundation and has driven, been the bedrock, if you will, and has driven what we have done since that period of time. In 2010, of course, we were hit by another major disaster, this time a man-made disaster. It was the oil spill, BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010 that again just devastated much of the Gulf Coast. Louisiana was really ground zero for many of those impacts. And it will factor into some of what I discuss here in just a bit. I mentioned that the master plan is a living document. It's something that we have revisited every 5 years. Another plan was developed in 2012, of course, that built on 2007. But in that time frame, I think the realization that perhaps the approach taken in 2007 wasn't as realistic or maybe as pragmatic as we needed to be was understood. And so in 2012, kind of a big shift was made from what would we do if we could do everything for our coast to what do we really think is realistic. We've got to be honest with our citizens, honest with the nation about what we think we can accomplish in coastal Louisiana so that we can make informed decisions about where we live, work, and play. And so in 2012, a shift was made from what would we do if we could do everything to what do we think is really accomplishable. And so we know we don't have all of the resources that we need to accomplish everything we want. We know, as was just discussed, that our coast is a changing landscape. It's going to change whether we're able to implement the master plan or not. And so what does that realistically look like? We don't have all the money that we need to do everything we want, and we don't have all the natural resources, fresh water, nutrients, and sediments. And so that was really kind of the step forward that the 2012 plan made in our master planning efforts. In 2016, I mentioned earlier, one of the resources that we don't have enough of is money. Well, in 2016, a settlement was reached between the federal trustees, the Gulf Coast states, and the responsible parties, BP and so forth, as associated with the oil spill, and about $8 billion has been secured for restoring Louisiana's coast and protecting our citizens as a result of that. And then in 2017, we had another master plan update. It's very similar really to the 2012 approach. It's resource constrained. But the beauty of revisiting the master plan every 5 years, of course, is that we're able to incorporate lessons learned from projects that we've implemented. Obviously, we've got advances in technology and science that occur over that 5-year period. And so those advances are incorporated into updated plans, and certainly were in 2012. So advances in climate science, advances in techniques and technology associated with implementing projects are all incorporated into those updates. So couple of things I heard earlier from some of the other speakers really is that much of this needs to be driven by the best science and engineering that we have possible. Architects and so forth need to be involved in this kind of thinking, and the scale is very important. So prior to that 2007 timeframe, really, Louisiana was doing projects kind of just a one-off approach. We do get a little funding to do something over here, we'd do it. We get a little funding to do something over here, we would do it there. But there wasn't really a comprehensive look at what we think, how those projects might fit together and what the best sequencing and approach would be to implement those. And so the master plan really incorporates that science, engineering, architecture, and so forth into a process that doesn't rely on any one single solution. You see a number of different solutions here. Multiple lines of defense has already been mentioned here today. The master plan certainly takes that into account, where our natural ecosystem serves as that first line of defense that helps to protect our engineered structures, levees, floodgates, and so forth, that ultimately help to protect our communities as well. So people often ask me, what is the master plan? What do you really think it is? And it really boils down to two things to me. First, it's a way to, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but it's a way to make really hard decisions. So when we're thinking about selecting project A over project B in a resource constrained environment. So again, we don't have all the money, we want to do everything. We don't have all the natural resources, we want to do everything. So how do you determine whether project A needs to be implemented before project B or should be implemented instead of project B? The master plan really is the way to do that. Again, founded in the best engineering and science that we've got available to us, and built on lessons learned from previous master plans and previous periods of project implementation. And then at the end of the day, it's a list of those priorities. It's a list of projects that we believe are the best investments for the citizens of the state of Louisiana, for the citizens of the country, and that will do the most good for our coast in terms of maintaining as much of our coastal landscape that we possibly can, and also reducing risks to our citizens to the greatest extent possible from hurricane storm surges. So since that 2007 timeframe, as we've been in this master planning environment and implementing those projects that have been driven really by the master plan, we've been able to secure some significant funding for the state, about a little over $20 billion. Much of that has been expended in the greater New Orleans area and is associated with the hurricane storm damage risk reduction system that's been talked about previously, and I'll touch on here in a minute. But quite a lot of that's been spent on restoration projects and risk reduction projects across the rest of the coast. We've dredged almost 160 million cubic yards of sediment to rebuild coastal marshes, to rebuild ridges along our coast, barrier islands, and other coastal features. That's benefited almost 50,000 acres of coastal wetlands along our coast. In terms of the more engineered structures, levees and flood walls and so forth, we've either built or improved almost 340 miles of those along our coast. Again, a lot of that's occurred in the greater New Orleans area, but much of it's occurred elsewhere as well. And then when we're really talking about that very first line of defense, obviously our whole coastal ecosystem, coastal landscape is the first line, but the outer edge of that line, if you will, or the true front line, is really our barrier islands. And so we've been able to restore or rebuild about 60 miles of barrier islands or berms along our coast. So again, much progress has been made. We really had a record year last year. We had 49 projects in construction. That was a record. It broke the previous year, which was a record in itself, where we had 40 projects under construction. With 5, actually, I believe it was 6 different dredges in operation last year, doing things like rebuilding marshes, ridges, and barrier islands, as a little while ago. I talked about the funding that comes to the state, and we do get some recurring funds from the federal government and from the state. There's some revenue sharing that occurs. You see Mesa listed here, which is related to energy exploration and production off the coast of Louisiana and the other Gulf Coast states. But a large portion of the funding that's propelling our program right now is associated with the BP oil spill settlement. And so you'll see some of that listed here, $130 million for a river reintroduction into the Marquardt Swamp. The Room for the River concept was mentioned earlier. That is a big part of our master plan, reconnecting the Mississippi River, which built our coastal landscape with its floodplain. $130 million from Restore dollars. That's associated with the oil spill. Mesa funding secured last year totaled about $125 million for a myriad of projects across our coast. More oil spill funding to create over 1,000 acres of marsh in the Upper Barataria project area and improve oyster productivity and work with marine mammals, again through oil spill funding. Another several projects, $215 million and $235 million respectively for projects in the Barataria and Lake Pontchartrain Basin to create, again, thousands of acres of coastal wetlands using dredges and ridges in both the Barataria and Terrebonne basins. And so we're excited to get these projects underway. Construction is beginning on many of those now. In terms of the land land restored or benefited, you can see many of these are sort of early pictures of some of the dredge projects and the under construction. Several here, Northwest Turtle Bay is in the Barataria Basin. Spanish Pass, I mentioned earlier, is in the Barataria Basin as well. This is the Bayou DuPont project. These projects are actually, the last two that I mentioned, Spanish Pass and Bayou DuPont, will actually take sediment from the Mississippi River via dredge, not river diversion, but via dredge, and put that sediment into our coastal areas to, again, rebuild ridges and barrier islands and marshes, as you see here. Oyster Bayou is another one of those, and the long distance sediment pipeline is another project that's taking sediment from the Mississippi River, placing it along our coast to help restore our ecosystem. In terms of levee improvements, this one has been mentioned already, but this is really the big player in the room, if you will. This is the Greater New Orleans area hurricane storm damage risk reduction system, or HSRIS. It's a system that's got a perimeter of about 133 miles. This protects several parish area in the Greater New Orleans area, both east of the Mississippi River and west of the Mississippi River, which you can see on the slide here. If you can consider the interior levees and floodwalls, you're looking at about 350 miles of engineered structures associated with this. 75 pump stations. One of those that was mentioned earlier is the Western Closure Complex, one of the largest pump stations in the world, with total pumping capacity of the system about 8 million cubic feet per second, and the total cost for this project is roughly $14 billion. This project has been substantially complete for a number of years, but we're actually within the next year and a half or so expecting this to be officially and finally complete in whole, and that system will be turned over to the state of Louisiana and the flood authorities that are in the areas that you saw there. Another big structural project, risk reduction project, is the Morganza to the Gulf levee project. You see the outline of that listed here. Number of flood control structures, locks, pumps, earthen levees, and flood walls associated with this as well. This is a project that the local parish and levee districts in the state have funded to date. The federal government has not participated, at least in funding, to this point in this project. We anticipate, hopefully that will happen sometime very soon, with about $450 million so far has been invested in this system. And again, all of these projects and systems that I'm mentioning right now have been identified, prioritized, and selected through that master planning process that I was discussing earlier. Virtually every barrier island along Louisiana's coast has been restored or worked on in some way, shape, or form. You see the Barataria barrier islands listed here from west to east. There's West Bell Pass, the Headland Project, Grand Isle, West Grand Terre, East Grand Terre, Chenier Keel, Cheland Headland Project, Bay Jawaz, Cheland East and West, and Pelican, and Schofield. So every island in the Barataria Basin has had some work that has occurred on it over the last 15 to 20 years or so. And I just highlighted some of the islands to the west. You can see some pictures of what those islands look like post restoration. Typically, the restoration of these islands involve increasing the width of the beach gulfward, increasing the height of the dune. Here, a typical dune height is relatively low, I think, compared to worldwide standards, but they're high compared to Louisiana standards, 8 to 10 feet high. And then a marsh platform is generally created behind the island to help the longevity of that island. As hurricanes approach, storms approach the Gulf, it helps, and sand gets washed back over the island. It's conserved in that woodland area behind those islands. Project that's under construction right now is a Terrebonne Basin Barrier Island project. There are 3 islands actually in this island chain that are being worked on now. The Trinity East Island, project. We've got a dredge that we're working right now, pumping sand and sediment, Timber Island project, and then the West Belfast project. And you can see a couple of other examples below there. Whiskey Island project, which is also in the Terrebonne Bear Island chain, and then Queen Bess Island was a bird restoration project. These projects were conducted again with oil spill dollars. Queen Bess Island was an island that was one of the, I think about 20% of the brown pelicans, which is Louisiana state bird, have historically nested on Queen Bess Island. It had shrunk and sank in size from about 35 acres to roughly 5 acres over the last several years, and was really ground zero for the oil spill. Many of the pictures that you may have seen of old birds and old pelicans from the oil spill were taken on this island. We were able to get in between nesting seasons and rebuild this island back to about 35, 37 acres. And within days of leaving the project area, the pelicans and other birds began to return. We anticipated about 1,000 nesting birds coming back to this island in the first year. We had over 8,000 pairs of nesting pelicans. So it was a tremendous success, and we're really excited to have been a part of that project. So I mentioned that we have updated the master plan historically every 5 years. That recently changed. Our state legislature has given us an extra year, if you will, and now we'll be updating that every 6 years. And so the next master plan update will come out in 2023. While that 2017, that seemed like it was a long way off, we began working on that immediately and are working on updating that plan as we speak now. And again, the real benefit of that is to be able to incorporate lessons learned and improvements in science, climate science, subsidence science, and so forth into our that we release now every 6 years. So much of that in terms of approach, in terms of scale, I think, in terms of just how we're thinking about our coast and our natural systems actually being part of our engineered systems and supporting our engineered systems really has been a result of the collaboration that we've had with the Netherlands, and certainly we're better off for it. So Dale, I'll conclude there, and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Bren. Thank you for that great synopsis of the master plan and its whatever the impact it's having on Louisiana. One of the things, like Deltares, supports the Dutch government with fundamental research for its own coastal protection and restoration and inland water work. The Water Institute of the Gulf is delighted and honored to support CPRA and other institutes, other organizations within Louisiana with that science, with that knowledge, with some fundamental research and applied research. And our final speaker today is the CEO and president of the Water Institute of the Gulf, Justin Airworth. And Justin's going to talk a little about some other projects underway in Louisiana, not necessarily related to the Coastal Master Plan, but are inspirational in and of themselves. Justin?
Well, thank you, Dale, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We're honored to bat cleanup here. I think it's certainly appropriate, and I'll kind of begin my comments by circling back to where we started. The formation of the Water Institute is really a result of the inspiration from our colleagues in the Netherlands. There's no question that in Louisiana, we've been working on this set of issues, coastal and deltaic challenges, for many decades. But it really was after Hurricane Katrina when then Senator Mary Landrieu said we got to go over to the Netherlands, we got to learn from the Dutch, and that story has been told, I think, very nicely and appropriately. And the thing I appreciate the most is the personal terms in which the story has been told this morning, and that we've so many of us have lived it. I feel like by having us come at the end of this, it's also appropriate because everything that is the Water Institute today is a result of standing on the shoulders of the giants that you've heard from and many other collaborators, the universities around Louisiana, our colleagues in the not-for-profit sector, our colleagues in the private sector. One thing we learned from our friends at Deltares is this phrase, the golden triangle. When you think of academia, government, and the private sector, and we've watched and have learned from Deltares as they live in that triangle and collaborate with all 3 points. And I think that somewhere in there is really the secret sauce, if you will. And so the inspiration that we've received from from the Dutch. The partnership and the continued work is just so important and can't be understated. And so the slide that you see here, this is our headquarters building in Baton Rouge. We have an office in New Orleans as well. But all that is in this building and the great people who work there and that we collaborate with really is so much a part of what we've discussed so far today. I'll say a little bit about the Water Institute, but not a lot, because really Dale hit it on the head at the beginning. We're created in the image of Deltaris. We look up to them greatly and have tried to really arrange ourselves to think in some very similar ways. So we have great expertise and opportunity in modeling and geosciences and ecology. One of the things that I think is very exciting and special about the Institute, one of the reasons I love working here so much, is this human dimensions piece, which I will say a bit about. It's really this recognition that the natural and built environment, we must of course work together, and what we're trying to do in terms of providing flood risk reduction and engineering with nature solutions is not simply about one element of the ecosystem, but how our economy and our way of life and our culture fit in. And for us at the Institute, one of the things that's so exciting, in fact, what we polled our staff recently, of looking back on we're almost 10 years old. What's one of the things you like the most about the Institute? It's the opportunity to influence decision making. We never advocate for a particular decision, but we use this methodology that the decision that needs to be made. You just heard from Bren Haas, and what he said so many important things. The one that resonates the most from an emotional perspective for so many of us is that there will never be enough dollars. There will never be enough resources or time to do everything that we would like to do. And so some of these decisions, David talked about the Ile de John Charles. These are gut-wrenching decisions from a human perspective. What communities can we protect? What communities do we need to alter? Where might we say that a way of life that has been there for many generations is no longer sustainable? Well, the argument that we make as an applied science organization is that those decisions cannot be made by politics. They cannot be made based on what community is represented by the most powerful senator or representative, but rather informed by a methodology like this. So I'm not going to talk about the work that the Institute does in support of CPRA. We're honored by that partnership. Bren talked about the master plan. It's something that really we organized ourselves as an institute around. They're really, what I will talk about are kind of the two planks as we see ourselves. The first is to assist Bren and his colleagues at the state with the master plan and with many of the projects within it. The second is to take that knowledge and apply it to other projects in Louisiana, apply it to projects in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And that has been so satisfying, because when you have an opportunity as Dale and David have been spending a lot of time together in Charleston, South Carolina recently, when you have the opportunity to take some of the insights that we've gathered in Louisiana and based on this partnership with the Dutch to a place like Charleston, not only do you have the opportunity to share insights and share ideas, but learn from the experience in Charleston, learn from the practitioners, and then bring that knowledge back to Louisiana. So that's one of the really exciting elements of being able to be a part of an iterative master plan. And Bren mentioned, we're constantly looking to update it based on the best knowledge and the best available science. That really comes through a partnership like those we've discussed today. I will mention that the sediment diversions, Brent hit on it. It's just very briefly for the Water Institute and our colleagues to be involved with a project of this magnitude. Brechia hit on it. I mean, engineering with nature really at a level, at a scale that's never been attempted in human history. It's incredibly exciting, and we would have never have wished for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the billions of dollars that came from that settlement. But the fact that our colleagues in the state and our partners in federal government and all the other sectors are able to collaborate on something so large and so important is really beyond thrilling. And once again, to hit the theme, we're doing this based on the best available science with an adaptive management approach baked in, with this recognition that we will, of course, learn and improve over time. One of the other very exciting things that are taking place right now, both at the state level in Louisiana and also most recently now with our partners in the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, is a recognition that we must look at the Mississippi River from a holistic perspective. When you talk to our friends in the Corps of Engineers, they will always reference the three elements that their mission has as it relates to the Mississippi River: flood risk reduction, navigation, and coastal restoration. Unfortunately, historically, those three elements oftentimes are looked at in silos. It's a familiar and unfortunate bureaucratic story. But there are many in the Corps of Engineers who have been working to break out of those silos. At the state level, the Institute is working closely with CPRA on a lower Mississippi River management program that really looks from this holistic perspective. How can the river be used for all three of the core objectives? And in the most recent WRDA bill, the Water Resources Development Act, that was part of the legislative package signed into law at the end of last year, there's a study, very important study, once in a generation study called for to look at the lower river from this holistic perspective. So all of these issues that we struggle with around how to divert the river for coastal restoration purposes, but also how to protect communities like New Orleans and others from flooding during the kind of remarkable high water events that we've seen over the last few years. It's really encouraging to see science overlaying in the policy area in ways that we have needed and recognized the need for many, many years. I'll hit a couple of other areas where we are doing some very exciting work with our colleagues in Louisiana, and again, learning so much from our colleagues in the Netherlands. So our governor in Louisiana, Governor John Bell Edwards, recently established a climate task force, a very ambitious effort to look at emissions reductions, a recognition that in our existential land loss challenge that we have here, we must also not only be very thoughtful and aggressive around adaptation, but also consider our role in mitigation around the impacts of climate change. And so the Institute has been asked to do a couple things as part of this effort. One is to do some facilitation to ensure that getting to these objectives, net zero by 2050, in a state like Louisiana, where you have a very important oil and gas industry, you have petrochemicals, you have an economy that has great opportunity in arriving at net zero, but also a series of trade-offs and alternatives. Back to what Bren said earlier and what I mentioned, how do you make these decisions not based on screaming and yelling at one another, but based on science? And so the Institute is supporting the governor and all of the participants in this process using a structured decision-making methodology to work with everybody to figure out, all right, what are all the alternatives to get us to net zero, looking at those pros and cons, and then ultimately making policy recommendations to help us get there. And one of the elements that's very exciting about that, sort of a sub-piece of this effort, is the quantification of carbon in our wetlands. So I really like this graph. The conversation globally around climate change mitigation is, I think, exciting in that there seems to be much more renewed focus on the issues in this country and internationally. We see great opportunity in Louisiana. Our marshes do a remarkable job of capturing carbon. And there has been important efforts made in the carbon quantification space. Many folks have spent time on this over the years looking at carbon markets. And there are a number of challenges that we think ultimately can be dealt with, but a number of challenges that have prevented big carbon capture and carbon trading going on. Nonetheless, when you look at the amount of carbon that our wetlands capture, there's tremendous opportunity. Even if it turns out that in the short term, there's not a return on investment in the marketplace, we're seeing so many corporations as well as governments rightly recognize other objectives, other reasons for wanting to invest in solutions that capture carbon. So this really, to us, hits on what Brechje was saying, earlier, the power of engineering with nature, and for the multiple benefits that you can achieve, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Another initiative that is worth mentioning is what we call the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. We experienced some horrific inland flooding in 2016. And as a result, the US Congress appropriated $1.2 billion to Louisiana to better prepare and recover. And one of the elements of that program that is incredibly exciting is a new approach in flood management. We are updating models, in some cases doing new models altogether across the state. We've divided it up into eight regions. And one of the areas that's particularly exciting for the Water Institute is looking at the transition zone, the area where you see compound flooding, riverine precipitation, and surge. Very difficult scientific and engineering challenge, but one that we're just thrilled to have the opportunity to make great progress for Louisiana, but also for so many other areas that experience these compound flood challenges. And so I'll now come back to engineering with nature for a moment and talk a little bit about public-private partnerships. While Bren and the state of Louisiana and some of our other state and federal partners are incredibly important to the Institute, from a policy perspective, it's our belief that you can't simply rely on state and federal funding. We have to figure out ways to incentivize the private sector to invest in engineering with nature solutions. So we've developed now a growing number of public-private partnerships. I'll highlight one in Port Fourchon. If you haven't visited Port Fourchon, it's a remarkable place. We lovingly refer to it oftentimes as the end of the world. It's down in the southernmost part of Louisiana, and it services nearly 100% of the offshore oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico. This area is experiencing massive land loss, the challenges that Bren outlined earlier. But the port's planning to dredge to 50 feet, and they're doing that to be able to service larger vessels. Well, the port has a strong history of using material to mitigate, and if you drive down LA1, that road to the end of the earth, as we lovingly say, you will see some wetlands that were created through mitigation. What we're doing in this public-private partnership is really this win-win-win situation, where we're using our advanced numerical modeling capabilities, but combining it with our human dimensions group to figure out how to get the biggest bang for the buck on the sediment that we will, the material that we'll have, to hit 4 objectives. Number one, how do you use that material to protect the port, to get wave attenuation and erosion prevention benefits, protect the infrastructure? Number two, the habitat benefits, the ecosystem service benefits. How do you maximize the services that will be created from these new ridges and terraces and wetlands? Number three, the resiliency benefits. And everybody loves that word resilience. We, as an applied research group, we like to define it and have metrics, and we've established metrics. And here, what we're doing is something called participatory modeling, where we actually sit with community members and essentially use the interactions that we have as data that are then used to influence in a very rigorous way the alternatives analysis. So number three is, how do you make the communities more resilient? And then number four is, how do you maximize the placement of the material from a carbon capture sequestration benefit? We're likely to introduce black mangroves. Their roots do a great job of keeping the material together. They capture a great deal of carbon themselves. So you put that all together, and we've been able to attract several $1 million worth of investment from private sector partners in the oil and gas industry, Shell, Chevron, service industry, partners at Danos, the port, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has made a major investment in this. And what excites us the most is that too often in our geography, you got people at odds. You got environmentalists and industry and community leaders fighting about what's the right thing to do. Here, we're all on the same side. We're all on the side of the angels, looking at how can we best engineer with nature to achieve our common outcomes. So that's been very exciting for us. And as I wrap up, I'll hit just one more selection of some things that we thought might be of interest to the group. This is something we're calling SmartPort. It's really an initiative that's underway now in a pilot phase, and in the next couple of months, we'll announce sort of a much bigger expansion of it. But effectively, we began this image is a signing ceremony with our governor and the head of the Port of New Orleans and the Louisiana Secretary of Economic Development. Basically, the challenge that was articulated to us by the head of the Port of New Orleans was, I get these emergency dredging needs. There was a $2 million contract that the port had to put out for some emergency dredging that they didn't expect. And the question was, can we do any better at predicting, at getting ahead of these challenges? And we've developed a solution that we're very excited about. It's in this pilot phase, moving into a larger implementation. And this is a little cartoon of really how we're doing it. But effectively, if you've ever used the app Waze, the traffic app Waze, we're creating a Waze of the Mississippi River and generating real-time and ultimately forecasting using new bathymetry map products. So by taking the bathymetry data from tugs and barges and other vessels that are moving around the river, we've worked with our colleagues at IBM and their Watson and machine learning and AI folks to develop both an app that goes onto the boat, and effectively what we do is we pipe the data that would really just be lost, not used at all, up into the cloud, and we clean it using survey vessel data as really the gold standard. And we're able to train it over time using machine learning, so that ultimately we'll be able to have a much better sense of the level of draft and the movement of sediment in the river. And so in closing and kind of wrapping up with that as an example, the Mississippi River is what created us. The Mississippi River has also been at the center of so many of our challenges. But we believe that with partnership, with using the best technology, and with thinking outside of the box, we have opportunities to engineer with nature, to reimagine how we use the river, how we use the tools at our disposal, and make sure that they're all working in harmony. So all of the data that we'll collect in the SmartPort initiative in the lower river will be used and shared by the coastal program to help maximize all of our other initiatives. So I guess the bottom line is that it's all really of one, and we're just beyond thrilled by this partnership. So thank you, Dale, for organizing us and for being such a coordinator and cheerleader throughout.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Justin. I hope you all the attendees see the wonderful amount of innovation and the serious approach to dealing with these various challenges that we have. And it's encouraging that there are ways we can see to adapt and protect and to continue to occupy these dangerous spots. The webinar is going to end in a minute, very quickly. We went a little bit over time. I just want to thank all the panelists and everyone who helped to present this. This was a terrific overview. I hope all the attendees enjoyed the process. There's a couple questions outstanding. I will try to answer those or get those answered directly to the people posing the question, and ask the ambassador to give us a closing word. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dale, and thank you very much to all panelists and participants. Good that you are going to take the time to answer the Q&As later on. I think that's important also for the engagement with the audience. A large audience, if I've seen, and that's because it was an impressive meeting. Actually, I'm lucky as an ambassador because I have a job that you're learning all the time. At the beginning of the week, I was fortunate enough to be present at the opening of the CES in Las Vegas, the Consumer Electronics Show, where we had a lot of Dutch participants as well in the digital field. Many startups and scale-ups, especially young people from Delft and from the tech industry, and here it's good to see that we have many experts on water and water management going back a long time. I've enjoyed the seminar, so I've also learned a lot here. What I missed a little bit, if I may, on the critical note, is I've seen a lot of looking back, and I've seen the list that was presented by Bren with the major funding announcements, but at the same time, I would be very happy if we could invest on the existing relationship and build on the existing relationship for future projects as well. That's something that I missed a little bit in this seminar, but I'm sure there are possibilities for strengthening our bilateral cooperation in the field of water and water management. So that's the pitch I would like to make at the end of this seminar. Thanks a lot to everybody, and let's keep in contact with the Dutch.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thanks all the panelists. We've captured enough of your time. Future collaboration is going to be planned, and hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.